Perfect. Today we're going to polish sterling silver. After we've engraved sterling silver, there is normally a trace element around each of these letters that's created by the nose piece on the engraving machine. What we're going to discuss today is the abrasive procedures with two different grits of sandpaper, namely 1500 and then the finer being 2000. We're going to explore the abrasive technique, and then we're going to take it to the buffing wheel and examine the quality of what we've done in that cleaning. Okay? First of all, the block that I'm using to sand this is a specially fabricated rubber block for sanding that we get at Glue Products. There's no other piece of wood or a piece of ice or anything else that would suffice for this project. It has to be this. Now I've got mineral spirits in this can. It's very clean, and this background has to be very, very clean. If we were working on a surface where steel wool had been used or sandpaper had been used, and that residue of either the steel or the sandpaper got underneath this paper, we would be making a series of very, very deep scratches that would then have to be taken out. So what I'm going to do is get this real wet, and I'm going to get plenty of fluid on the silver. Okay, I'm going to hold it tight, and I'm going to use circular motions. And again, this is the 1500, and you can see that it immediately shows a coarse scratch across the plate where that has been applied. It takes a fair amount of abrasion to remove all of the tracing that appears around the letters after the engraving. And again, all the motions, I'm pushing down pretty hard with this hand, holding it very securely with this hand, because if this were to knock off and fall on the ground, it'd be very expensive. So I'm keeping a very secure hold on it and applying a uniform circular motion. You really can't feel when you've achieved what you're trying to do, so you have to look at it. You have to make an effort to use the light or the sun to give you the reflection you need around these letters to find out if you should happen to have more trace of the letters from the nose piece. It's got to be a lot of fluid. It can't be dry. It's got to stay very, very wet. And as you build up this black residue, it's got to be washed off that abrasive paper, and the liquid is reapplied constantly to the silver. Okay, I think that's enough with the 1500 grit. So now we're going to change to the 2000 grit. What the 2000 grit is basically doing is removing the scratches that you created with the 1500 grit. It's smoothing those lines out, and in the process eliminating all the other flaws on the plate. Again, I've got a good hold on it with my left hand, and I'm pushing it down with a fair amount of pressure. The motion that I'm sanding is circular. Circular is very important to do instead of this. This would create potentially a wave in that brass if you were to take that area down more than the area adjacent to it. So everything is done with a circular motion. You really can't see much of a difference between the 2000 and the 1500. So it's a matter of feel. The 1500 lines are going to be harder to buff out with the machine. So it's good to give it a good amount of abrasion with the 2000. That looks to me to be in a good state to take to the wheel. Okay, we're ready to start buffing this now. Now the buffing is going to consist of two separate abrasions, very much like we did with the sandpaper. They're both going to be done with very different wheels, different rakes, and I'll show you the function of this rake, different compounds, and probably most importantly, different gloves. The second polishing, which is the final finish, has to be completely isolated from all the contaminants that happen from this first, more coarse compound. This is a tallow-based composition of an abrasive grit, like sand, in this compound. The other compound, which is green, this other compound is a considerably finer compound, which will bring out the final. It'll eliminate all the scratches, all the flaws. I shouldn't even be touching it with these gloves, but this is the green compound that's used for the finish. Everything is in its own bag. The gloves are kept separately, the wheels are kept separately, and we're ready to start. First thing I'm going to do with this small diameter wheel, which is what's indicated, you can get a wheel up to 8 inches, and that would be very, very wrong for this application. First thing I'm going to do is take this rake, which consists of staples through a board, and I'm going to cut the glaze off of that wheel. That's old compound and old metal residue, old silver residue from prior work, okay? Now I'm going to apply the compound to the wheel. This is going to generate a fair amount of heat. And it's a very abrasive compound, and you can probably see that we've already eliminated all the scratches and the satin finish from the abrasion. Okay? And I'm gonna be very careful with this. The most important, the most critical aspect of this is at no point am I going to get that wheel close to that edge. If it does, it's going to shoot it against that wall and make an unrecognizable pretzel-like form out of this very expensive piece of sterling, okay? At no point is this to be crossed up. You also have to have gloves, so at no point you're handling it like a hot potato, subsequently dropping it on the ground, which will have another very, very negative effect. So I'm going to be polishing this from 360 degrees, which is very important in getting the letter detail to all be uniform. I'm polishing it from every side. Now I'm looking at it from time to time with the reflected light to show me whether or not I've still got any of the swirl marks created from the sandpaper. And I don't, which is good. I'm polishing the edge. And again, I never let that wheel get to the top of that plate. It would be very hard to hold it if it did. I can feel a fair amount of heat coming through the leather of this glove at that point. It's very important not to lose control of the brass, the silver. Now you can see how bright that is, but there's actually a lot of haze, which are very fine, almost microscopic lines, which reflect light, that are created by this heavy compound. So what we're going to do now is we're going to wash this plate to remove that compound before we go to the final green finishing compound. All right, the next stage, which is very important, is we're going to clean the oily residue from that compound off of that plate, particularly as it's lodged inside the details that are engraved. We're going to use acetone, and we're going to use a clean acid brush. Okay? Now, as I apply this, you'll see the black residue coming out of the letters. And I'm poking this brush into the details in order to clean out every last little bit of that heavy compound, because it doesn't take much of that compound at all spinning at that speed to leave a lot of scars on the final finishing green compound. So we make an effort to get this real clean. Now I can see from the black that I'm depositing here on the paper that we got the compound out of there. We have sanded it with the 2 grits, polished it with the first abrasive compound, the brown compound, and cleaned it with acetone. Now we're ready to go to the final act, which is green. We got to think green now, okay? Everything is contained in a separate bag. The green rake says green wheel only, okay? The gloves have never been used, and I like these leather gloves. The cloth gloves are very usable also. The good thing about cloth gloves is the cotton gloves can be thrown into the wash to keep them very clean. I just happen to really like these. Sometimes it generates more heat than others. The green wheel is kept in this separate bag with the green compound, okay? First thing I'm going to do is install the wheel and while we're working here in this phase of the operation, which is the final cut, I'm going to leave this machine on. We don't want any residual matter, either from our hands or from this area or any place, to stick on that wheel. And the centrifugal force of that wheel will keep that from happening. I'm going to use this rake and lightly scratch through that wheel to remove any built up residue on the wheel itself, okay? Now I'm going to apply the green compound and again, although this is a relatively small diameter wheel, it can still throw this thing against that wall to make it an unrecognizable form. So I'm gonna hold it tight and I'm gonna apply the green wheel to the edge. Now what we're looking for is simple. We're looking for perfection, okay? You can already see the difference between the area that I've just started and the area that has the haze from the prior, more coarse compound. Thankfully, I'm not seeing, first of all, scratches. I'm not seeing nose cone traces from the engraving. All I'm really working on is eliminating the haze that we created with the last brown compound. I'm polishing from every possible angle, being constantly careful not to let that wheel impact this edge, because if that happened, it would pull it out of my hand. Now after we've polished it from every possible angle, I'm going to take a moment and very gently eliminate that haze from the edge, which you could barely see, but I generally do this before the final cut. Now that we've gone all the way around and there doesn't appear to be any scratches, I'm going to straighten it out with a very light linear touch. Very light. I'm going to come this way, which does not get the top of the plate. Then I'm going to come this way. And again, avoiding the top of the plate. That's perfect.